Hey, what's up, YouTube fam? It's your favorite black guy from Nebraska. Yes, there's plenty of black people here in Nebraska today. I'm here to bring you some more information that will get you thinking and that will boggle your mind. So today, we want to continue to read out the book, Drugs as Weapons Against Us. It's the CIA's murderers targeting SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lenin, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists that are black, white, and many other ethnic groups. Okay, when I read this book, it changed how I perceived, how I viewed the world and everything around me, and definitely the government entities that reside here in the United States of America, the empire of the United States of America, the lengths that they will go through to silence, with jail, murder, or frame-ups of individuals who seek to go against the status quo. So today we want to talk about how this government, our government, flooded the urban areas, the ghetto, with drugs purposely, intentionally, and the many dynamics of that. So without further ado, let's go ahead and continue. CIA floods American urban areas with Asian opium. Okay, this is just an example. U.S. intelligence pressed American leftists as their agents pushed heroin along with other drugs. Janis Joplin's biography, Alice Eccles, said heroin became a regular part of the San Francisco music scene as early as 1965, when Joplin and many others turned to heroin to help them come down from speed. Organized crime figures such as the Genovese Mafia family, who worked with U.S. intelligence from at least World War II, trafficking heroin, also worked closely with top jazz club owner and publisher Morris Levy. The top black jazz musicians who played regularly in this club, such as Charlie Bird Parker, got hooked on heroin and also served as role models in their communities. Other jazz greats who got hooked on heroin include Billie Holiday and Miles Davis. The trafficking of heroin from the Golden Triangle into American cities increased tenfold during the 60s, in seeming proportion to the increase in anti-war and black radical activism. A U.S. narcotics agent summarized this in respect to the amount of heroin coming into New York. He said in 1961, when we seized 15 kilos, there was street panic in New York City. Junkies were lined up in front of doctors' offices begging for the stuff. Now, in 1971, we seized 500 kilos in 3 weeks, and it has no effect whatsoever. I mean, listen to the ramifications of that. Okay, and are we so surprised at the so-called the fentanyl and heroin and the drug crisis that exists today? Are we so surprised? We shouldn't be. We know who's involved. In 1971, a CIA leak to the New York Times reported that laboratories in the Golden Triangle region around Vietnam produced more than enough tons of Western-grade heroin a year to satisfy the 10 tons of heroin Americans consumed annually. Americans living in black urban communities report a sudden flood of heroin into their neighborhoods. This is not just somebody talking, okay? This is literally what occurred, purposefully, okay? Crime skyrocketed as junkies stole to support their heroin habits. Suburban and small-town American streets soon succumbed to this scourge as heroin use filtered down to their safe white neighborhoods. Peter Arnett of the Associated Press reported that heroin flooded America in the late 60s, causing the first nationwide epidemic. In 1970, a conflict occurred between the CIA and President Nixon's Justice Department. On a June day that year, Attorney General John Mitchell announced that his Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs had arrested 150 suspects around the country. Its aforementioned Operation Eagle was deemed the largest roundup of major drug traffickers in the history of federal law enforcement. Mitchell said these whistleblowers handled about 30% of all heroin sales and about 80% of all cocaine sales in the United States. Reviewing Operation Eagle, University at California, Berkeley professor Peter Dale Scott and State Department researcher Jonathan Marshall found that as many as 70% of those arrested had once belonged to the Bay of Pigs invasion force. This was the CIA's amassed army of Cuban expatriates launched against the socialist government of Cuban revolutionary leaders Fidel Castro and Ernesto Che Guevara. Mario Ascendor and other Operation Eagle defendants had their court cases thrown out on a technicality. Escondor went on to become one of the Miami's most powerful and untouchable traffickers. Other CIA trainees enjoyed similar status in the drug trade through the 70s. Let me read that again. Other CIA trainees enjoyed similar status in the drug trade throughout the 1970s. American University professor Clarence Lusane joined Professor Alfred McCoy in reporting that U.S. intelligence supplied drugs to organized crime families who carried out most of the street-level drug dealing. Let me read that again. American University professor Clarence Lusane joined Professor Alfred McCoy in reporting that U.S. intelligence supplied drugs to organized crime families who carried out most of the street-level drug dealing. By the later 60s, the CIA began using other major dealers as well. The first black high-level drug dealer, Frank Matthews, grossed over $100 million by 1971, with over 100 people cutting and bagging heroin and then cocaine in New York City. Early in 1973, Matthews was arrested. He gained bail and, by that July, left the game, disappearing with his bodyguard, mistress, and $20 million. Imagine having $20 million in 1973. Lusane stated that a top-secret Justice Department report cited how 9 of Matthews' drug suppliers had their drug importation charges dropped because of their ties to the CIA, illustrating the CIA's dominance in drug trafficking. How amazing is that? And so we're supposed to be a country that's all about law and order, right? How are we supposed to be about law and order when the CIA, a government entity, a United States government entity, is trafficking drugs and bringing them in? So how do you think that the fentanyl epidemic that occurs today in this country, you think that spawned out of the middle of nowhere? Absolutely not. I guarantee you that our government is working with cartel to bring those drugs over here. It's nothing new. It's been occurring. So let's go ahead and go to the other part of this book that I want to read you that goes along with what we're already reading. Drug war against poor people of color. As the 1980s came to a close in many American cities, cocaine and its cheaper and quicker delivery system, the rock-like smokable crack, had risen in popularity to at least equal the problem of heroin addiction. In African-American and Latino neighborhoods, gangs increased in numbers, with the largest being Los Angeles rival Bloods and Crips. A Hollywood film, Colors, the title coming from their opposing red and blue bandana colors, made them well known worldwide. In communities where these drugs were sold, users developed addictions to them that resulted in loss of money, jobs, and families. Addicts developed tolerances to the drugs and had to use more to get the same effect. Men often had to deal and or steal to afford them. Women had to steal, or prostitute themselves. The violence stemming from the gang wars for command of drug-dealing turf harmed communities around the country. Many people were killed in these wars, including innocent adults and children who were in the wrong place at the wrong time. As fear rose, those who could flee from crime-ridden urban areas did so, bringing down the tax base and impoverishing inner-city areas with abandoned buildings and limited revenue to pay for services. This is how the ghetto was created. Law professor Michelle Alexander studied the issue of drugs for years. In a review of Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, magazine writer Ernie Cooper said, "The war on drugs was the creation of conservative political strategists, that it resulted in disproportionate drug arrest rates in poor communities of color may even been part of the plan." The drug war, the war on drugs is a war on what? Was a war on minorities. Alexander's statistics show that in 2004, 75% of all people in prison for drug offenses were black and or Latino, despite the fact that the majority of the country's illegal drug users and dealers are white. Supporting Michelle Alexander's conclusions, a New York Times column noted that President Clinton signed a law originally formulated under President George H.W. Bush, establishing the 100-to-1 punishment ratio for crack cocaine possession versus powder, meaning sentencing guidelines of 6 months for possession of a small amount of powder cocaine were 600 months, 50 years, for possession of the same amount of crack cocaine. The Times column said Clinton signed this despite the pleas of civil rights leaders who correctly predicted that this would be an anvil dropping on the black community. Alexander's The New Jim Crow spent 10 months on the New York Times bestsellers list. In her introduction, Alexander wrote, "Few legal rules meaningful constrain the police in the drug war, and enormous financial incentives have been granted to law enforcement to engage in mass drug arrests through military-style tactics. Once swept into the system, one's chances of never being truly free are slim, often to the vanishing point. The New Jim Crow debunks the notion that rates of black imprisonment can be explained by high crime rates and identifies the huge racial disparities at every stage of the criminal justice process, from the initial stop, search, and arrest to the plea bargaining and sentencing phase. In short, the New Jim Crow explains how the legal rules that structure the system guarantee discriminatory results. The legal rules ensure the undercast is overwhelmingly black and brown. And in my opinion, I will go more on the black side. For example, California is more the government of California really supports those of Latino descent over black people. For example, if you go to jail as a Latin or Hispanic, you have COs who will help you and assist you and aid you over those who are black. California is very, very pro-Latino, so I would just adding that in there. There's really no such thing as people of color. It's just everybody against black people. And that's just my opinion. That's what I see. A number of other sources supported Alexander's conclusions. For example, a documentary, Kids for Cash, highlighted how corporations gave kickbacks to 2 judges for sending thousands of kids to the corporation's private prisons for minor offenses. The Pennsylvania courts both found both judges guilty and stated that one of the judges had violated the constitutional rights of thousands of kids. A number of these kids were sent to juvenile prisons after first-time minor offenses such as marijuana, paraphernalia possession. Another example of systemic corruption that is incarcerating people en masse comes from documents released by National Security Agency whistleblower Edward Snowden. Reuters detail how the Drug Enforcement Agency, DEA, had a special operations division that partnered with over 24 other agencies, including the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and the Homeland Security. The DEA trained federal agents in falsifying their investigative trail. Wow. What they did in their investigation, how they came to find evidence. So you have government agencies lying, which they called a parallel construction, a false story about how and when they obtained evidence. This opens the door for planting false evidence without being caught. As Reuters detailed, a secretive U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration unit is funneling information from intelligence intercepts, wiretaps, informants, and a massive database of telephone records to authorities across the nation to help them launch criminal investigations of Americans. Although these cases rarely move national security issues, documents reviewed by Reuters show that law enforcement agents have been directed to conceal how such investigations truly begin, not only from defense lawyers, but also sometimes from prosecutors and judges. The undated documents show that federal agents are trained to recreate, aka lie, the investigative trail to effectively cover up where the information originated, a practice that some experts say violates a defendant's constitutional right to a fair trial. If defendants don't know how an investigation began, they cannot know how to ask to review potential sources of exculpatory evidence, information that could reveal entrapment, mistakes, or biased witnesses. I have never heard of anything like this, said Nancy Gertner, a Harvard Law School professor who served as a federal judge from 1994 to 2011. Gertner and other legal experts said the program sounds more troubling than recent disclosure that the National Security Agency has been collecting domestic phone records. Now, the NSA is over the CIA, if you didn't know that. U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark remains one of many prominent people who backed Alexander's general review, even before these revelations about bribed judges and the DA's systematic cover-ups. After working under President Kennedy and Johnson, Clark became a more radical activist and gave his opinion of U.S. intelligence use of drugs. As noted earlier, he said, "I think the government uses drugs to sedate and divide the masses." And you can pretty much sum that up in what we read. I'm gonna read that again. "I think the government uses drugs to sedate and divide the masses." This was a bombshell dropped, okay? I hope that YouTube doesn't hate on me in the algorithm, because a lot of people need to see this. Many people, because of the media, perceive the war on drugs as a necessity rather than seeing all the moving parts that involve the war on drugs. A lot of it was deceit, lies, exculpatory evidence, tall tales, and I'm not saying that the community didn't play a part, but when you have a government that has all the resources in the world to help or hurt a situation, and they're using their resources to overwhelmingly hurt a community purposefully, I think that is the most important thing, right? Because we're supposed to be about honesty, law, and order as a country, because God bless America, right? So we're supposed to be the ones that are leading the pack when it comes to doing things the right way, no matter what. Whether we're chasing bad guys or not, we have to cross our I's and dot our T's. And you have this country and this government purposefully lying, creating entrapment, becoming more like the bad guys that they're trying to arrest, really, in my opinion. So I hope you guys enjoyed that information. I'm going to show this book again because you got to get it. It'll open your mind up. Drugs as weapons against us. The CIA's murderous targeting of SDS, Panthers, Hendrix, Lennon, Cobain, Tupac, and other activists. And please, in the comment section, let me know if you want to read me, if you want me to read any particularly about any of these individuals that you see on the front page. Kurt Cobain. You want to know what happened to Kurt? Let me know. I can make some content about it. It's your favorite black guy from Nebraska. Yes, there's plenty of black people in Nebraska. I'm out. Peace.